The air in the cargo hold of the C-17 Globemaster III was thick, a noxious blend of hydraulic fluid, stale coffee, and the unique, dry metallic smell of high-altitude oxygen leaking from the supplementary tanks. Outside, the Karakoram Mountains clawed at the sky, a hostile landscape of granite and ice, rendered in shades of gray and bruised purple by the weak pre-dawn light. Specialist Officer Hayes sat braced against the aluminum wall, her knees tucked close to the modular aluminum frame of her combat life support bag, the Alice pack customized for extended trauma care. She wasn't carrying a standard M4. Her assigned weapon was the heavily modified Mossberg 590 pump action, loaded with lethal slugs, ostensibly for close-quarters base defense. She was the team's insurance policy, their trauma surgeon on loan from the 10th Special Forces Group's medical detachment, or so they thought. Hayes was small, meticulously organized, and almost unnervingly quiet. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe regulation bun beneath her ACH helmet. The only thing that betrayed the internal machinery grinding beneath the surface was a subtle, almost invisible silver ring she wore on a paracord necklace tucked deep beneath her collarbone. A deep thrumming vibration rattled the decking as the pilot feathered the thrust reversers, signaling their final descent onto the hastily prepared tactical airstrip designated Site Obsidian. The team leader, Master Chief Petty Officer Brody, a man whose face looked carved from the same hard granite as the mountains outside, finished adjusting the Nod's mount on his helmet. He looked Hayes up and down, a cursory, almost dismissive glance that lingered on the aid bag before returning to his SEAL counterparts, the Foxtrot call sign team who were heavily kitted out for direct action. "Doc." Brody's voice was a low growl, barely audible over the turbines whining outside. "You good? We're rolling hot off the ramp in 90 seconds. Remember the protocol. You stay behind the fire line. We don't need you getting mixed up in the high-speed stuff. Your job is holding that bag open." Hayes nodded, a small, tight movement that conveyed compliance without sincerity. "Understood, Master Chief. TCCC first and foremost. I'll run CATS and NPA like I'm running a drill." Brody offered a thin, approving smirk, the look of a professional satisfied that his subordinate understood her limitations. "Good girl. Keep your head down. We don't carry 5 kilos of trauma gear for nothing." He moved away before she could respond, joining the huddle where he received final mission instructions from the operations officer, General Davis, who had flown in specifically to oversee this politically sensitive raid targeting a high-value proliferation network deep within the contested zone. Davis was everything Hayes disliked about the general staff: polished, loud, and operating in a state of high self-importance, his starched collar immaculate even after the long flight. He wore a crisp, unblemished digital camouflage uniform that had clearly never seen a day of mud or blood. As Brody detailed the ingress route, a narrow gorge leading to the target compound, Davis spotted Hayes securing her trauma shears. He approached, his highly polished boots echoing sharply on the metal deck. The sheer proximity made the air colder. "Specialist Hayes," Davis said, not as a greeting, but as a pronouncement. His voice held the distinct tenor of rank speaking down to a tradesman. "I read your file. Impressive scores at Walter Reed. Excellent triage competency. But understand this. This isn't a clinic. This is direct action, kinetic environment." He placed a gloved hand, heavy and condescending, on her shoulder plate. "Your value to the mission is strictly prophylactic. You are the last line of defense against catastrophic blood loss. You are not a combatant. If you have to engage, something has gone drastically wrong. Stick to the medical protocols. Leave the tactical side to the professionals, all right? You only carry bandages." Hayes felt the familiar cold knot tightening in her gut, the same knot that had formed 3 years ago, leading to her quiet, involuntary transfer out of the 75th Ranger Regiment's reconnaissance company and into the relative anonymity of the supporting medical staff. She met Davis's gaze. Her eyes, usually soft and focused during a patient interview, were now flat, obsidian hard, reflecting nothing back. "Sir," she replied, her voice low and even, utterly devoid of emotion. "My primary directive is casualty stabilization and preservation of life. My secondary directive is self-preservation to ensure the primary is met. I understand the chain of command." Davis smiled, a brief patronizing flash of white teeth. "See that you do. The last thing we need is a lost medic interfering with the kinetic flow." He turned abruptly, satisfied. Hayes waited until his back was fully turned, then reached down, her fingertips brushing the cold, heavy steel of the Glock 19, tucked deep inside her utility vest, secured by a custom Kydex holster. She subtly adjusted the sling on her Mossberg. Bandages, she thought. He has no idea what I carry. The massive rear ramp dropped with a hydraulic groan, releasing a flood of sub-zero air and the sharp, clean scent of high-altitude snow. They were on the ground. The insertion was textbook, at first. Brody led the six-man Foxtrot team in a tight wedge formation, moving swiftly away from the airhead. Hayes and the communications specialist trailed 20 meters behind. The objective lay 3 kilometers ahead, up the narrow, winding gorge known locally as the Serpent's Tooth. The silence was the loudest sound, the rhythmic, synchronized crunch of 16 military boots on packed snow, the faint hiss of breath passing through filtration masks. Everything else was absolute zero. The temperature had dropped to 18 Celsius, threatening exposed skin with instant frostbite, forcing the operators to rely entirely on muscle memory beneath layers of thermal gear. Hayes focused on her pace count, maintaining the required distance, eyes scanning the high ridges above, the classic locations for observation posts and ambush sites. The gorge walls rose sharply, dark sentinels of rock that provided excellent concealment for an enemy lying in wait. They cleared the 1,500-meter mark. Brody keyed his throat mic. Foxtrot 1, checking environmental scan. Wind speed 0 at the valley floor. Temperature stable. Visibility 3 kilometers. Comms check. Over. The comm specialist behind Hayes muttered the confirmation. Loud and clear, Foxtrot 1. Solid signal. Hayes tasted the metallic edge of her hydration pack nozzle, maintaining a steady, low-output energy level. Every step felt like walking through concrete. The weight of her medical supplies, intubation kit, field surgery instruments, multiple IFACs, and 2 units of warm whole blood, was significant. Then, the world shattered. It wasn't a warning pop or a distant crack. It was a detonation. A sharp, white-hot, earth-shaking thump directly ahead of the lead element. The sound wave slammed into Hayes' chest plate, momentarily stealing her breath. She didn't hear the shrapnel whine, but she felt the tremor through the soles of her boots. IED! IED! Contact! Front! Brody's voice was instantly ragged, ripped by exertion and shock, cutting through the radio static that immediately flared up, a desperate crackle competing with the explosions. The detonation had been followed instantly by a barrage of heavy-caliber fire, echoing with terrifying volume off the gorge walls. It wasn't standard AK fire. Hayes immediately recognized the deep, tearing sound of a PKM machine gun, a relentless cyclic rate designed to turn flesh into aerosol. The lead operator, Foxtrot 2, let out a choked cry over the open mic, followed by the sickening thud of heavy gear collapsing onto the snow. Hayes dropped instantly, moving into the fetal, high-crouch position taught in immediate action drills. She pulled her aid bag closer, but her eyes were already locked forward, calculating the range to the contact point. Approximately 40 meters. Smoke, black and greasy, curled from the crater where the IED had blown a massive chunk out of the trail. The remaining 4 members of the Foxtrot team had immediately gone to ground, returning fire. But it was disorganized, panicked suppression. Foxtrot 1 is hit. Brody is down. I repeat, Master Chief is down. Grievous wounds. Foxtrot 2 is KIA. We are pinned. They have the high ground. That was the voice of Foxtrot 5, terror slicing through the comms. Hayes reached up and flipped the toggle on her communications unit, switching the channel to the secure satellite burst. She heard General Davis's voice screaming from the distant command post, a panicked, useless roar. Retreat! Foxtrot! Pull back! Abort the mission! Hayes ignored him. The mission was already aborted. Survival was now the only objective. She took a slow, calculated breath, tasting the cold air. The wind, previously silent at ground level, was now whipping down the gorge, carrying the coppery stench of burnt explosives and blood. She crawled forward rapidly, traversing the 20 meters to the nearest cover, a cluster of jagged, snow-dusted boulders. The PKM tracers were lacing the air just inches above the snow line, stitching precise patterns. This was not random fire. This was a well-planned, expertly executed ambush, likely by hardened paramilitary or special insurgency assets. Brody lay prone, half covered in snow, his position a testament to the severity of his injury. He wasn't moving, but his hands were still loosely wrapped around his weapon. Hayes saw the dark crimson spreading rapidly beneath his vest, soaking into the pristine white snow. Arterial bleed, likely a massive laceration from shrapnel to the upper leg or pelvic girdle. High priority, massive risk. Foxtrot 3, cover fire. Sustained burst, 5 seconds. I am moving to 1. Hayes's voice was a sudden, sharp intrusion, cutting through the chaos. It wasn't the voice of Doc, the ancillary personnel. It was the voice of command. Foxtrot 3, a heavily built SEAL named Hammer, hesitated for a crucial half-second, then responded, purely on instinct, to the clear tone of authority. Covering. Hammer unleashed a controlled burst from his M4, chewing up the rocks on the opposing slope, distracting the enemy gunner just long enough. Hayes moved. She covered the remaining 20 meters, not in a panicked crawl, but in a low, disciplined sprint, utilizing the terrain fold perfectly. She reached Brody, dropping beside him, instantly assessing the damage. The left thigh had taken the worst of it. The IED fragment had punched a massive hole just above the knee, likely severing the femoral artery. The blood loss was catastrophic. Brody's face was ash gray, eyes blinking rapidly in shock. "Doc, told you, stay back," he wheezed, his voice faint. Hayes didn't waste oxygen on pleasantries. Her fingers were already tearing open the inner pouch of her kit. Massive hemorrhage, secondary shrapnel fragmentation, pressure dressing useless. Her movements were a blur of efficiency, honed by hundreds of hours in the operating theater and the field. The specialized ratcheting medical tourniquet, RMT, was out, slid high up his thigh, just below the groin. Click, 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 click. She drove the ratchet down until the bleeding pulsed once, weakly, and then ceased. The stench of blood was overwhelming, metallic and hot in the cold air. She was focused on the trauma, but her peripheral vision was processing the tactical picture. The enemy position was entrenched in a shallow, rocky overhang, 300 meters up the north face. The PKM position provided excellent interlocking fire coverage. Brody's rifle, an M110 semi-automatic sniper system, ESASS, lay beside him, its suppressor coated lightly with snow. It was a high-precision instrument, chambered in 7.62 TAG 51mm, capable of sub-MOA accuracy at significant range. Hayes reached out, her hand bypassing her own shotgun, and grasped the cold receiver of the M110. The sudden visceral connection to the weapon felt like an electric shock, a physical manifestation of the suppressed identity she had fought for 3 years to bury. She checked the optic. Variable power, already set at 10x magnification. The scope was slightly misaligned from the fall, but usable. She quickly checked the chamber. A round was seated. The magazine held 19 more. "Brody, status?" she demanded, not as a medic, but as a troop commander. Brody grunted weakly, eyes glazing over. "Broken 3 ribs, I think. Can't move. My rifle? I have it." "Give me a sit rep on the enemy density," Hayes ordered, her eyes sweeping the ridgeline, identifying muzzle flashes. 3 positions. PKM, maybe 2 spotters. And a commander, maybe. North face, 300 meters. They have us sighted in. Hayes raised the M110, settling the buttstock into her shoulder pocket. The cold metal immediately began leaching heat from her face. She closed her left eye, focusing with the right, utilizing the Mildote reticle to measure the angle and distance. She flipped her comms back to the secure channel, bypassing the frantic, static-filled transmissions coming from Davis's remote command post. "Foxtrot team," Hayes commanded, her voice calm, clear, and utterly lethal. "This is Doc Hayes. I am taking tactical command of the contact area. Foxtrot 3, Hammer, Foxtrot 5. Report ammunition status and casualties." Silence. Then Hammer's strained voice. "Doc, what the hell? Where's 1? 1 is stabilized but incapacitated. Foxtrot 2 is confirmed KIA. Status report now." The urgency and certainty in her voice brokered no argument. "Hammer, 3 full magazines remaining. Minor fragmentation to my right forearm. Foxtrot 5, 2 mags. M4 has a stovepipe jam, need clearance. He's taking suppression from the far right position." Hayes processed the data instantly. 2 operators pinned, with inadequate firepower against a crew-served weapon system. Exfiltration was impossible until the suppression was eliminated. Listen closely. We are changing the tactical geometry. Foxtrot 5, you are engaging the jam. You have 30 seconds. Foxtrot 3, I need you to lay down 5-second controlled bursts, high angle, towards the center ridgeline. Draw their attention. Do not expose yourselves. I am engaging the primary threat. Hammer sounded utterly bewildered, but the sheer desperation of their situation superseded his skepticism. Affirmative, Doc. Engaging. But you're using one's rifle? That's sass. You can't— Shut up and fire, Hammer, Hayes snapped. Hammer initiated his suppression fire. The sudden burst of 5.56 mm fire temporarily pulled the focus of the PKM crew. Hayes focused on the scope. The 300-meter range was well within the M110's effective capacity, but the high-altitude wind was a factor. She assessed the visual distortion of the tracer smoke, moving left to right at a steady clip. 15 knots, quartering wind from the west, she muttered to herself, referencing her internal ballistic data. She had to hold 1.5 mil-dots left for deflection and account for the cold air density, slightly increasing the projectile velocity. She wasn't calculating this on a Kestrel device or a field computer. She was calculating it in her head, based on ingrained muscle memory from years of high-altitude training. Hayes steadied her breathing, a technique learned in the mountains of Afghanistan. Slow inhale, half exhale, hold, the perfect trigger pull rhythm. The crosshairs settled precisely on the chest of the PKM gunner, visible only as a dark shape partially shielded by a stack of sandbags. She applied pressure to the trigger shoe. Slowly, steadily, crack. The sound of the 7.62 mm round exiting the M110's suppressed barrel was a sharp, focused report, far less violent than the PKM. Through the scope, Hayes saw the immediate, sickening impact. The gunner, previously engaged in a ferocious stream of fire, jerked backward violently, vanishing behind the sandbags. The cyclic fire of the PKM sputtered, choked, and stopped dead. The sudden silence was a massive vacuum, almost as jarring as the explosion. Hammer stopped firing. Was that a hit? Hayes ignored him. She was already working the bolt, cycling a new round. The rifle was heavy, cold, and immensely satisfying. She shifted her focus 15 meters to the left, locating the man who looked like the second in command. Visible now, scrambling to assess the sudden loss of their main firepower. He was reaching for a radio. No comms, she thought. No reinforcement vector. Hayes adjusted her hold slightly. Same range, same windage. She shifted the point of aim to the center of mass, slightly lower this time, ensuring a clean engagement. Crack. The man dropped his radio and crumpled. 2 down. The speed and precision were terrifying. The remaining enemy forces, realizing they were being systematically decapitated by an invisible, highly accurate sniper, ceased their organized fire and began sporadic, desperate bursts towards the area where Hammer and 5 were sheltering. Foxtrot 3, you see the effect? Hayes asked, her voice calm, professional. I see it, Doc. Unbelievable. Who taught you to shoot like that? Hammer stammered. We have 3 targets remaining. 2 on the ridgeline, 1 flanking far right, attempting to move into the gully. Foxtrot 5, is your weapon clear? Clear. Ready to fire, Doc. 5 responded, his panic replaced by a fragile hope. 5, focus fire on the flanking target. Immediate priority. He's closing the distance. Do not let him hit our 6. 3, maintain suppressive fire on the remaining 2 on the ridge. I will take them out sequentially. Ready? Fire. The resulting volley was far more coordinated. Hayes, leveraging the M110, was able to isolate the 2 ridge targets. They were seeking cover, exposing only small portions of their bodies. Hayes slowed her breathing again. This was the work of a professional hog, hunter of gunmen, not a medic trained to apply sutures. She had to compensate for target movement. The range was still 300 meters, but the light was worsening, making the thermal signature less distinct. The first target broke cover, moving rapidly toward a rock cluster. Hayes led him by half a body width. Crack. The round took him mid-stride. He pitched forward, rolling down the slope. Only 1 remained on the ridge. The last target, clearly the commander, was smarter. He wasn't shooting. He was observing, trying to locate the source of the precision fire. He briefly raised a pair of binoculars. Hayes saw her chance. The slight movement, the momentary exposure of his head and shoulders. This was a smaller target profile. She tightened her group, aiming for the ocular ridge. Crack. A small, satisfying puff of rock dust and red mist confirmed the kill. Total engagement time for the ridgeline threats, 75 seconds. 5 shots, 5 hits. The only remaining threat was the flanking element engaged by Foxtrot 5. 5, Ceasefire. Status on your target. Target neutralized, Doc. I got him. He tried to move into the blind spot, but I put a mag into his sector. No movement. A profound, aching silence settled back over the gorge, broken only by the faint hiss of Brody's regulator. The metallic stench of gun oil and powder smoke hung heavy in the sub-zero air. Hayes lowered the M110 slowly. The cold steel felt like an extension of her own nervous system. She hadn't just neutralized the threat. She had vaporized the enemy's chain of command and their heavy weapons capability. She finally turned her attention back to Brody, whose breathing was shallow but stabilized. Foxtrot 3-5, Hayes said, her voice dropping back into the clinical, professional tone of the medic, though still carrying the immutable weight of command. We are consolidating the casualties. Foxtrot 5, establish a defensive perimeter, 360-degree security. Maintain visual on the ridgeline. Assume hidden reserves. Foxtrot 3, assist me in packaging Master Chief Brody for exfiltration. Hammer crawled over, his face a mask of awe and confusion, struggling to reconcile the quiet medic with the lethal sniper. Doc, who the hell are you? Hammer whispered, wiping snow and sweat from his eye. Hayes was already tearing open a thermal blanket, her hands moving with the methodical speed of someone racing against the clock of hypothermia. Right now, I am the person keeping your commander alive and ensuring you don't get a bullet in the face, Hammer, she replied, her eyes never leaving the wound. Focus on the extraction protocol. We are moving 50 meters back to the extraction zone now. We need to initiate the emergency exfil request, EER, and get a Pavehawk on station. She reached for the secure radio, bypassing the handheld unit attached to her pack, and accessed the satellite burst transmitter built into Brody's helmet. A more powerful unit. She switched to the command frequency. She could hear General Davis still screaming, his voice distorted by panic and distance. Foxtrot, report! Why is there radio silence? I authorized immediate withdrawal. Do you copy, Foxtrot? Hayes keyed the transmission button. Negative, General Davis. Foxtrot team is compromised. Primary target neutralized by IED. Secondary enemy force engaged and eliminated. Master Chief Brody is Patient 1, Category Alpha. Immediate EER is required for extraction. Grid coordinates Delta 47099er. Alternate LZ established 50 meters rearward in the main gorge path. Call sign Medic is assuming tactical command until recovery. Hayes released the button. The silence on the command channel was instantaneous and absolute. She had effectively told a general that she had ignored his panicked order and won the engagement he had deemed lost. After a stunned moment, Davis's voice returned, ice-cold with fury, trying desperately to recapture authority he had just lost. Medic, you are not authorized to command. Identify yourself immediately and explain the unauthorized kinetic engagement. Hayes didn't bother responding. She threw the transmitter unit aside. We don't have time for a post-mortem, gentlemen. We have a critically wounded Master Chief. Hammer, strap him into the litter. 5. Watch the 6. I will cover the flank with the M110. The next 30 minutes were a brutal, disciplined movement. They dragged the heavy litter backward through the snow, Hayes constantly scanning the ridge, her finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. The cold was digging deep into their bones now, and Brody's stabilized condition was precarious. Finally, they heard the distant, beautiful thumping of rotor blades, the MH-60M Pavehawk arriving for the snatch-and-grab extraction. The pilot, ignoring the standard insertion path, risked a low-level approach, banking sharply through the gorge to reach the LZ. As the Pavehawk hovered, kicking up a massive vortex of snow and icy grit, Hayes oversaw the loading of Brody onto the hoist, ensuring the intravenous fluids and warming blankets were secure. She performed a final sweep of the area, retrieving all discarded brass and equipment, maintaining operational security even in the final moments of chaos. She picked up her original Mossberg and replaced the M110 beside Brody, cleaning the snow from the suppressor. Hammer, climbing aboard the helicopter ramp, paused and looked back at her, his face grim with unspoken respect. Doc, I owe you my life. Who are you, really? Hayes gave him a flicker of a smile, a tired, ancient expression. I'm the insurance policy, Hammer. Now get your ass on board. She was the last one to climb the ramp, the hydraulic door slamming shut, sealing them inside the relative warmth of the cabin. The flight back to Site Alpha, the forward operating base, FOB, 200 kilometers away, was tense. Brody was quickly stabilized by the flight surgeon. Hayes stripped off her outer gloves, revealing hands that were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. When the Pavehawk landed, General Davis was waiting on the tarmac, surrounded by military police and his personal detail. His face was a thundercloud of repressed rage. Hayes stepped off the ramp, the cold wind whipping her hair loose from the bun. The second her boots hit the concrete, Davis was on her, his voice a low, dangerous snarl only meant for her ears. "Specialist Hayes, my office. Now. You violated a direct order, commandeered an unauthorized weapon system, and engaged in a kinetic action that was far outside your pay grade and specific directives. I want to know who trained you to fire that M110 with that kind of precision. You are facing a field court-martial for insubordination and conduct unbecoming." Hayes looked at him, not defensively, but with a gaze that held the quiet certainty of deep, justified experience. She smelled faintly of cordite, oil, and the sharp, sterile scent of iodine. Davis smelled of cologne and bureaucratic indignation. She didn't salute. She simply stepped closer, invading his personal space, forcing him to look directly into her eyes. "General Davis," she stated, her voice flat, professional, and entirely focused. "I saved the lives of 4 operational personnel, eliminated a hardened enemy cell, and secured a critical asset, all after your direct order for retreat would have resulted in the mass execution of the entire team. Do you have any idea what kind of firepower that enemy position represented?" Davis recoiled slightly, unsettled by her intensity. "That is irrelevant. Your job is bandages. You are a medic, not a Delta operator. My file is redacted, General. You read the cover sheet and assume the contents," Hayes replied, reaching slowly inside her collar and pulling out the paracord necklace. The small silver ring gleamed under the harsh fob lighting. She held the ring up, letting him focus on the distinctive stylized engraving of a stylized dagger overlaid on a scroll. "My name is Captain Hayes, General, former 75th Ranger Regiment, Regimental Reconnaissance Company, RRC, team lead, designated marksman. My previous assignment was not at Walter Reed. It was serving as an embedded specialist with JSOC for 3 years before political fallout over the Kandahar extraction forced my administrative transfer and demotion to specialist." Davis stared at the ring, his face draining of color. RRC was the elite of the elite, the silent commandos who executed high-risk, deep reconnaissance and direct action far behind enemy lines, the people who never existed on paper. Your Ranger RRC?" he sputtered, his voice cracking with disbelief and a sudden, terrible, dawning realization. "I was discharged under what they called non-judicial administrative separation, a nice way of saying I took the blame for a botched political cover-up involving civilian casualties, even though the mission succeeded. My rank was stripped, my record sealed, and I was given a choice: discharge or serve in a non-combat, highly scrutinized role until my term expired. I chose to serve." Hayes let the ring drop back beneath her collar. She stepped back, her tactical advantage secured. "Now, General, regarding the M110 SAS, I maintained a sub-MOA group at 300 meters, corrected for a 15-knot quartering wind, neutralizing 5 high-value targets, including a crew-served weapons platform. I followed TCCC protocol precisely and stabilized a critical patient while simultaneously executing a near-perfect tactical counter-ambush. The team is alive, and the mission threat is eliminated." She fixed him with a cold, unforgiving stare. "You ordered a retreat that would have been a massacre. I executed an authorized, necessary escalation. You may proceed with the court-martial, General, but I suggest you review the testimony of Master Chief Brody and Foxtrot 3 and 5 before you attempt to explain to the Joint Chiefs why you punished the person who saved your deployment from total failure." She paused, letting the implication hang in the freezing air. "If you charge me, my entire sealed record, including the politically inconvenient truth about Kandahar, comes out in the investigation." Davis stood rigid, his breath misting in the cold air, completely defeated. The MP detail and other personnel were watching them. Though too far to hear the details, they could sense the seismic shift in power. "You are dismissed, Specialist Hayes," Davis finally ground out, his voice hoarse, thick with shame and impotent fury. "File the official report, detailing the enemy engagement and all kinetic action, specifying the use of the M110. You will restrict your narrative to factual data. Is that clear?" "Perfectly clear, General," Hayes affirmed, giving him a crisp, textbook salute. the ultimate signal that she was now back in compliance, but only after dictating the terms of engagement. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the vast, anonymous metal hangar where the field hospital was being erected. She was cold, exhausted, and the trembling in her hands had returned, but the soldier buried beneath the medic's uniform felt a profound sense of grim satisfaction. She had used her specialized skills not for politics or glory, but for survival, and in doing so, had forced the establishment to recognize the true depth of her capability. She was an expert in trauma, both causing it and fixing it, and today, the latter group had been the beneficiaries. The narrative of the mission would be rewritten, sanitized, and probably attributed to the swift action of the Foxtrot team. But Hayes knew the truth, and so did Hammer, Five, and the barely conscious Brody. That was all that mattered. The blood on the snow belonged to the enemy, and the lives saved belonged to her. She walked past the comm station, the radio silent now. The storm passed. She knew her career in the conventional army was likely still over, but she had rediscovered something far more valuable in the smoke and chaos of the gorge. She was still lethal. She was still a warrior. If you believe respect is earned by blood and not by rank, type respect in the comments.